Hi, welcome to SFL Liberty Report. This time we are discussing the Georgia elections, and with me I have Liza Basiliaia, a human rights activist and an observer for this year's election. Thank you so much for joining us, Liza.
Thank you so much for being interested on what's going on here and inviting me.
So Georgia has a tough relationship with its neighbors, most knowingly Russia. Would you care to explain a little bit of what happened this year?
Yeah, so basically not this year, but in last year, our government tried to implement a Russian-style law on foreign agents, which would declare organizations that got over 20% of their funding from abroad as foreign agents. But after lots of protests, we initially managed to drop the law, but then they re-implemented it this year. And besides the fact that hundreds of thousands of people came out to protest, they were still able to initiate it, and it got really violent. We have riot police that comes out during the protests, and people, including me, were injured severely, and there were mass arrests and just lots of terrible things happening. They also initiated anti-LGBTQ law against what they call LGBT propaganda, which basically lays down groundwork for morality police to exist. And it has lots of horrible, terrible, oppressive amendments in it. And yeah, just people were protesting, and there was this lots of government feelings. And on top of all of that, after the war in Ukraine started, our government members had basically very pro-Russian rhetoric against Ukraine, and they were saying that they wanted to promote peace and good relations with Russia, and they didn't, like Georgia, they didn't sanction anyone from Russia. Actually, lots of people after the war started and the West began pulling away from the country, lots of Russians moved here, and they were able to get their documents here very easily. They started opening up businesses, and when you walk out in the street in Tbilisi, you hear Russian more than you hear Georgian right now, which is just terrible.
Mhm.
So, with all of that going on, we sort of focused all of our energy as activists on upcoming elections and making sure that we get rid of this authoritarian regime that, for example, our head of our government, unofficial head of Georgian Dream, well, not unofficial, but Bidzina Ivanishvili, who's number one on the list of GD right now, said that we should apologize to Russia, despite the fact that there was a genocide that happened in the 90s in Abkhazia, and also another war in 2008, and lots
That
of
means that your
atrocities
country
I'm not going to get.
is still in
Yeah.
parts occupied by Russia, right?
Yes, more than 20%, and people are getting kidnapped from the borders and killed and terrorized almost daily.
Wow, it's really terrible to see that Georgia was caught up in the middle of Russia's imperialistic ambitions. You've also mentioned the Russia law. Could you please explain why it would be such a threat to democracy in Georgia?
So basically, anything good that has been done for the past 30 years that Georgia has been a free country has been done by Western money, by US, European Union, or various European countries. They've funded buildings of schools, hospitals. The US helped us a lot with our military. NGOs really do a great work of keeping governments accountable. And with this law and its principles, number one foreign agent would be our government itself that has accepted foreign help multiple times. Even the parliament's website where the foreign agent law is published is done by foreign money, by the help of the European Union. They did major reforms in the justice section to make our judges more accountable, more fair. And initiating this law before the elections just meant that they wanted to sort of attack the NGO sector that was overseeing the election process, writing stuff about it to the foreigners, to the press. And first of all, lots of people would be left unemployed because it is a huge sector. then in villages and in other areas where there's not a lot of just schools and stuff like that, actually there are American corners that teach people English, and they do movie screenings, and they give people opportunities that our government just doesn't do because of corruption or lack of resources, whatever. So, I mean, it would be terrible. It would leave us isolated. We got the candidate status to the European Union a year ago, almost to the day, and it would derail us from joining that union, and it would just lead us back to Russia's arms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the EU candidacy, and unlike some of its neighbors, like Azerbaijan, Georgia was always a little bit more closer to the West. And in 2022, I believe, you were rejected the candidacy, mainly for your democratic institutions. But then, when you later, like you said, you were accepted. Do you think that there was an improvement that was now broken, or do you think it was just like a political reason?
I don't think that there was an improvement from 2022 to 2023. When we got the candidate status, the EU officials made it clear that the status was for the people and not for the government. It was a political choice to show the people that EU was on our side and it was not going to abandon us. And it was just something to hold on to before the elections. Now, after the elections, recently, negotiations have stopped fully. There's absolutely, I think we will probably lose the status, but nothing is moving forward at this moment because the EU is not going to be negotiating with people that stole our elections.
Mhm. Right. So we haven't got into it in very detail, but in this past election, the Georgia Dream, I believe is the name of the party
Yeah.
that won, and it's very close to Russia, which defeated a coalition of four parties closer to the West. And there is some allegations that the election was fraudulent. In case, I believe in a survey a few years back, like 80% of people wanted a closer EU, and wanted Georgia to be closer to the EU, and as you said, many protests happened, so people are clearly very passionate about this topic, and still they lost the election. Do you believe that really did happen, that there was some fraudulent activities?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, there are like three parts to the story. So, what happened before the elections, what happened on election day, and then what's going on now. And that's how I think we should like sort of split it up. But I 100% believe that elections were falsified. And I know that like for someone for you that lives in European Union, like what I'm about to say is probably unimaginable, but pretty much I have proof for everything. And this will just like scratch the surface of what elections in authoritarian regimes are like, because we are living in a pro-Russian authoritarian regime right now. Central Election Commission, or CEC for short, is the election administration that is supposed to be this independent, non-partisan body responsible for organizing the elections. So on election day, there are CEC commission members at each polling place, making sure that everything runs smoothly. There are also people from political party commissions, and then there are observers, so people from non-governmental organizations that are there to sort of monitor the process. Now, this year, Georgian parliament introduced some changes to increase public trust. Well, that was their official reasoning behind it, but in reality, there were very, very, I don't know, just like bad decisions. One of the main thing was basically the amendment transferred the power to appoint the commission's chairperson and 7 members from the president to the parliament. Now, parliament is controlled by Georgian Dream. They have the majority. So now the parliament's speaker nominated the candidates. So a Georgian Dream representative nominated the candidates, and then majority vote, so Georgian Dream MPs selected the chairperson, so the main person responsible for running the elections, and then 7 commission members. And basically, opposition had absolutely zero say in what happened. And then before the elections, there was a terrible environment. In August, one of the political leaders for Coalition for Change, Nick Amelia, was attacked, and he had an injury to his face by GD, Georgian Dream supporters. In September, there were 3 other cases of different political party members being attacked and violently beaten, and their cars, like their tires, would be stabbed, so their cars would get destroyed and stuff like that. And another thing to note that I will come back to in the end is that some people, like elderly people or people that have like government-related jobs, like people that work as cleaning service for the streets, they're reported that their ID cards were stolen taken by some criminals that intimidated them into it before the elections. And also there was a really high amount of immigrants that wanted to vote for this year, over 100,000 people in different countries, and you had to register beforehand if you wanted to vote from abroad. But there was a lack of polling places. So basically the only polling places that were before were places that had diplomatic missions, so you could only vote in Georgian embassy of a country. So example, in all of France, you could only vote in Paris, where there was an embassy. And this was a huge issue in the United States, especially, where you can only vote up in Washington or New York. And legally, the commission is supposed to open a new polling place if there are 50 Georgian citizens demanding it in one city, but they never did that, never. And the places were not equipped to handle as many people as showed up. For example, in London, people were waiting in line for 9 hours to be able to vote. Yeah, so that's kind of what happened beforehand. Okay, so this was the first year that we had electronic elections. Before, it was just by paper, we would circle it and then they would count it. But this year we had like machines, and then you would put it in the counting, another machine that would count the ballots. And the equipment was done by Smartmatic, which is the same company that did elections equipment in Venezuela. And we all know how that turned out. So another important thing to note is that you don't have this, but we have something called the marking fluid spray. And it is a spray that is applied to a finger, and it is to prevent election frauds and like double voting during election day. So they spray it on your finger after you get the ballot, and then before you enter a polling place, they check on LED light because it leaves a mark. And it is a method that they use in countries where people don't have identification. So in like India, Bangladesh, countries like that. I have no idea why we still use it in Georgia, but we do. But it's easy to kind of, like there are sprays on Amazon that you can buy and you can just use it and they take off any of the stuff that the marking spray lives on. And this year, marking spray was noticeably weaker than the past couple of years. And actually, I kind of, like my case is really interesting for this. So in the morning, I went to my polling station to vote, but I went earlier to see it opening up and make sure that everything was intact. And I was the first voter there. So, you know, they scanned the LED light, then they sprayed me, I got the ballot, I voted, and you could clearly see who I voted for, but I'll get into that in a minute. And then I wanted to make sure that the LED light was working, but the woman that sprayed the spray on me kind of did it weirdly. Like she held my hand in a weird way and she just sprayed it on my nail, and I have gel nails. So when she shined the light on me, you could not tell that I was marked. Like there was nothing on my finger. And then she was like, oh no, I messed up. We won't do it again. But then there were a lot of cases of people that were not getting marked. And yeah, I mean, it was crazy that something like that happened. But yeah, that was the first issue. Then another issue is that everyone's sort of choice on who they vote for should be confidential, right? This is a
Of
very,
course.
very basic thing. Well, the design of ballots compromised the voters' privacy. There was a really thin paper, and the candidate that people chose was very much visible. I was standing near the counting machines, and I could have seen who everybody voted for because the ruling party is 41, and then the other party's numbers are like 4, 5, 9, but there were like also like you could see if you voted on the bottom, you were circling in 41, and if you voted something for the top, you were circling the opposition. And there were covers for the ballot that you were like handed in order to sort of protect your vote, and you were supposed to flip it upside down, but the marker was not supposed to leak on the other side. Like the papers were supposed to be thicker or the markers were supposed to be better, but they weren't. And when you would slide in the ballot, you would keep the cover. And as it was sliding in, you could clearly see who every single person could vote it for. And also, there were high-resolution cameras installed by the ruling party near the counting machines. And in mailing polling stations, you could have identified each voter, timing of their vote, and because of this, easily determined their voting choices. And also at the ballot boxes, there were commissioners who were often aligned with Georgian Dream, and they could have seen who you were voting for. And also these commissions, usually polling places in Georgia are in schools that are then turned into it. And the administrators are teachers. And then it's in people's neighborhoods. So they see their teachers or their kids' teachers when they come in, and everyone knows everyone because it's a small country and they could memorize it. And also, during every elections in Georgia, there's kind of a group of criminals outside, like just older men dressed in black that try to intimidate people that are going in the polling places. And yeah, observers noted them being inside, outside, not getting kicked out. And there were lots of cases of people voting multiple times or using someone else's ID card. And pretty much all we could have done is write complaints, and then that's it. And
Which of course are
yeah, I
not
mean,
going to be heard because it's the ruling party that, of course.
exactly. And also the equipment. I mean, that was a huge, huge issue, especially after what happened in Venezuela. So the machines were supposed to sync with each other. And I, for some reason, before I started doing trainings, thought that if, one ID card is kind of its information is put in the machine, then okay, this person is not supposed to vote for the second time, right? No, they were not in sync with each other. So people technically had the ability to vote as much as they wanted. And it was just this little spray that you could have easily gotten off that was supposed to check it. And sort of the selection process for these devices was under exclusive control of the Central Election Commission, and no NGOs, no one was really involved in how they were selected. And also the government did the audit for these machines. So we didn't know like any of the device specification, program codes, data handling protocols, nothing. We don't know anything about this stuff. And yeah, I mean, the secrecy is seriously concerning because they could duplicate the information, they could manipulate it however they want. And in some polling stations, there was internet, and we were told that there was not supposed to be internet in any of these applications. And yeah, I mean, it could have been used for real-time monitoring. And also another thing, and I'll finish up on the election day, but lots of media representatives were attacked, and in places where there are ethnic minorities, so ethnically Armenian or ethnically Azerbaijani people, there were lots of cases. And in Marneuli, which is a village that is like mainly ethnically Azerbaijani people live that are not really integrated with Georgians. Like there was a case where someone just took a bunch of papers and stuffed ballots in the box, which is crazy. And then even the president called the police because there were criminals outside of her voting place. And yeah, I mean, during the election day, I have it on my laptop. I'm going to read it out. It's like at around 5 p.m., Observer Mission My Vote reported that there were lots of cases on violence. So basically, cases of marking violations are in 70 polling places that allowed voting without marking, breaches of voting secrecy in 47 polling places, unauthorized individuals present in 139 polling places, physical assaults in 39 polling places, technical malfunctioning voting equipment in 133 polling places, and then observers were kicked out of 61 polling places, which is just absolutely wild.
Completely.
Yeah.
And do you think that the government will face consequences for this disaster of an election process?
Well, I mean, we're trying really hard. So we're having lots of protests. I mean, today I couldn't go, but in different locations, there's one we're trying to paralyze the city and also legally. I mean, I was documenting a lot of the stuff. And when the election results came out and Georgian Dream had 52%, which is an increase from the election 4 years ago. They had, I think, 49% during the last election, and only their percentage increased. No other party did. And we started to sort of uncover what happened. Like we were counting each polling place, analyzing everything, and in all of the polls that were done before the election, Georgian Dream had 41 to 44% range. And then we uncovered, like not me, but NGOs and kind of people that were working on it. There was a scheme that targeted public sector employees and other groups, like people that needed social assistance, ethnic minorities, also people that were in prison. And basically, they had call centers under each polling place. And civil servants were asked to like bring in people in their network that supported Georgian Dream. And there are over 300,000 people that work for the government. And basically, there were offices and they were processing personal data of the people whose IDs they stole. And they were taking in their private information, making IDs with them, and then having like their workers going to a bunch of different polling stations and voting instead of other people. And this could have, for example, included immigrants that were outside of the country, and like with their information, other people could have voted. And yeah, I mean, basically, their strategy targeted like people that were disadvantaged or they had family members in prison. And yeah, I mean, it was wild. And
Completely.
yeah. And now there were a lot of cases in courts because you're supposed to appeal what happened in courts. And only one judge said that the voters' like secrecy was compromised. But then the government took it to a higher level court, and the higher level court, which is controlled by Georgian Dream, ruled that everything was fine. And 2 days ago, one of the judges held lawyers in court for 24 hours of deliberation, and they had to argue for literally 24 hours. And then they still ruled that everything was fine.
Wow. It truly is a very different or and a very compromised democratic system. Do you think so a few days ago the direction of the West policy is going to change with the election of Donald Trump? Do you believe that, or do you believe in his rhetoric that he will make the world safer and that there will be an improvement for countries such as Georgia that gets trapped in this geopolitical conflict? Are you optimistic?
I am optimistic that we will get rid of them. I think that if we let them get away with it, because now they're not in the parliament, like there are lots of procedures that are supposed to be taking place before the parliament is completed, and in December the new parliament is supposed to come in. And I think that before that we have to fight. I was optimistic about the elections, but I never thought that they would leave on their own. If they stay in Georgia, we will fall apart and we will become the new Belarus. And the economic situation will just be terrible to handle, because even now, like, our currency is going down terribly. No foreign investors want to come here because of political uncertainty. Like, human rights are basically a joke, and lots of people are leaving the country at a super high rate. Like, around 200,000 people have left the country in the past 4 years, which is crazy. And I don't know, young people, like, I'm not going to stick around if GD stays. I'm going to go to Europe because I don't want my life to be in Russia, of course, but I'm going to fight my hardest not to let that happen before. I think that because of the protest, because of the sort of resistance, I mean, I can feel it in the streets. There are tons of graffitis, just a bunch of different initiative groups doing something. There are people going inside buses and saying that the election was stolen from us and that we have to fight. And yes, okay, opposition could be doing more, but I believe that if we sort of preserve this discipline and if we keep going the rate we are going in, I think that Georgian Dream will have sort of no choice but to leave.
Mhm. Are you afraid that if that does happen, Georgia might be made with a military intervention like Ukraine?
I don't think that Russia could do that right now because they are losing in Ukraine. And I think that a lot of stuff on what happens here is actually dependent on what happens in Ukraine. And I believe that Ukraine will prevail. And sort of lots of Georgian dreams propaganda is that, oh, if we leave, there's going to be a war. But I don't want, like, we will become part of Russia without a war if they stay. So I believe that the West is not going to let another war happen. I believe that Putin doesn't have the resources to start another war after this epic failure that he experienced in Ukraine. So I don't think that there will be any sort of military intervention, no.
Thank you, Lizzie. This has been very interesting to hear. Is there any parting words that you would like to say?
Um, I mean, I think that everyone's support is really important. I loved how, like, European Parliament members came out the next day of the elections and said that they were not legitimate, and pretty much the only people to congratulate Georgian Dream was the Iranians and Orban. So it has really meant a lot, and I just wanted to really express that without Western support, we would not have as much motivation to fight as we do.
Thank you.
Thanks.